Welcome to CITT Long Beach. It's a pleasure to see so many familiar faces here. It looks like we have a full house. For those people in the back, please come forward. There are more seats in the front. Okay, please come on down. My name is Marianne Venieres. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for International Trade and Transportation, and I'm also the Deputy Director of the Metrans Transportation Center. Metrans is the center that provides funding for our annual town hall events. It is indeed a great pleasure to welcome you here to our 7th annual CITT State of the Trade and Transportation Industry Town Hall meeting. The main purpose of our annual town hall meetings is to present and to discuss the state of the trade and goods movement industry in the spirit of education. One of CITT's primary functions is to provide a neutral forum where all the parties in the logistics industry and its community stakeholders can come together and address the issues and bring about solutions. The members of the Policy and Steering Committee are listed in your program on page 18, and I would like now to take the opportunity to introduce the chair of the CITT Policy and Steering Committee, Dr. Marilyn Krager, who is the Dean of the University College and Extension Service. Dr. Krager, would you please stand up to be recognized? Thank you. And along the same line, I would like to ask the members of the Policy and Steering Committee to stand up now and be recognized. Please stand up. Thank you. And thank you all for your hard work and support and the many volunteer hours you put into this program and the other activities that we have at CITT. In fact, we do put a lot of thought into selecting the topics for our town hall meeting, and we start by looking at the suggestions that the audience had submitted on the evaluation form in your program. Those are the forms. The number one request that we've received last year was on the topic of mobility and congestion. Now, this combined with the goods movement crisis that we just witnessed in Southern California, this made tonight's topic a very easy decision. Few understood what led to the crisis. Some blamed unexpected high cargo volume, others capacity limitations at the terminals, a shortage of dock workers, rail equipment and capacity shortage, mega ships, and I heard some even blame Homeland Security. People called it the perfect storm in which a number of elements converge to create a cargo jam. Many fear that the perfect storm will become an annual event in Long Beach and in LA, occurring every time one unexpected problem sets off a chain reaction. Last year, shippers were worried about whether cargo could be delivered on time for the holiday season. This year, shippers are worried that nothing has changed, and as a result, cargo will be delayed for the coming summer and fall peak season. With this, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're going to explore first what led to the 2004 goods movement crisis. Second, what lessons have been learned. And third, and this is the meat of tonight's discussion, we are going to ask each industry segment what can be done to prevent a similar crisis from occurring again. But first, we are going to have a very dynamic keynote speaker who will discuss the important role of the logistics industry and the role it plays here in Southern California. Following his remark, we are going to set the stage for the panel discussion with a video that looks at the causes and the impact of last year's peak season crisis. The video is a little bit longer than we usually allow, but we felt that the importance of the topic and the complexity of the issues warranted some extra time. The focus of the panel discussion, as I said, will be on solutions. And we structured the program in such a way to allow for plenty of questions from the audience. And with this, we are going to keep the introduction of all our presenters intentionally short. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me now great pleasure to introduce to you the Provost of the California State University, Dr. Gary Wishart.
Thank you, Mary Ann. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a distinct pleasure and an honor to greet you and to welcome you this evening on behalf of President Robert Maxson, the faculty, students, and staff of California State University, Long Beach. We have a most distinguished gathering here this evening from the public sector, from the private sector, from higher education. Among us tonight, of course, are many of the influentials who can make desirable changes happen, and many of the researchers who can help them find the ways to do it. The Town Hall represents the epitome of regional and local service to which our campus, indeed to which the entire California State University, is deeply committed. It also represents, as Mary Ann's description suggests, the meaning and the purpose of a university, where education and, most importantly, reasoned discourse can be applied to the solution of the most important social and political and economic questions of our time. I want to thank all of those who have worked so hard to bring the town hall about. The town hall has become a highly valued institution for our university, but even more, I think, for our community, for our region, for our state, indeed for our nation. Finally, I want to salute the Center for International Trade and Transportation, the host for this town hall. CITT, now in its 30th year, already has a long and distinguished history, working on histories of multimodal transportation and logistics research. As most of you know, CITT is a partner with the University of Southern California in the Center for Metropolitan Transportation Study, or METRANS, which has been designated by the United States Congress as a University Transportation Research Center. CITT also serves as the Trade and Transportation Cluster of the Gateway Cities Partnership, a highly valued regional community partnership comprising 27 cities in Los Angeles County, including our own city of Long Beach. CITT's mission is noble: to provide a collaborative forum, that's noble in any cause, to provide a collaborative forum to facilitate the growth of international trade and the regional economy. And this is important, very important, in an environmentally sustainable manner. This is what tonight's town hall is all about. Cal State Long Beach is proud to host you. I wish all of you a productive and enjoyable evening and unpredictable and successful outcomes as you work together and talk together on tonight's critically important topic. May good ideas flow, and may many new partnerships emerge.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wishart. I would like to point all our guests to this form here. And as you notice, this is mostly for our ILWU attendees. We ask you to put your ID number on this form, and I understand that we run short of our brochures. What that means is we have over 1,100 people in this room. So we... I was asked to tell you that when you leave, please pick up a form and fill in the ID number, and at that time, we will also collect it. It suddenly got dark here. Could I get some more light? Because at this time, I would like to recognize some very special guests that we have here. And what I'll do is, just to save time, I'm going to ask you to stand as I call your name. And I ask the audience to please hold your applause until we finish introducing those very important dignitaries that we have here among us. First, I would like to recognize State Senator Alan Lowenthal. We have Perla, nobody following direction. We have Perla Hernandez from the U.S. Congresswoman Grace Napolitano's office, Kathleen Hollingsworth from the U.S. Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, Rob Simpson, Assemblyman from Assembly Member Betty Carnett, Council Member Frank Colonna, City of Long Beach. We have Tom Warren, Harbor Commissioner from the Port of LA. We have Jim Hankeler, Harbor Commissioner from the Port of Long Beach. Captain Peter Neffinger with the Coast Guard. He's the captain of the port. He's here with his lovely wife, Gail Staber. Luann Bynum, the Vice President, Assistant Superintendent, Long Beach City College. Dave Arian, President of the ILWU Local 13. Adrian Diaz, Local 63, and Daniel Miranda, Local 94. Two more people. We have Dick Steinke here from the director of the Port of LA, and we have Bruce Seaton, Long Beach. Sorry, Dick. And we have Bruce Seaton, the interim director of the Port of LA. Please, ladies and gentlemen, recognize those important people. Before we get started, I want to bring two things to your attention. The first one is that tonight's proceedings are going to be webcasted. The webcast is archived and it can be accessed through the CITT website. The website address is on the bottom of your agenda in the program. The second part is, and I indicated this already, we need your feedback, and we are asking you to fill out the green form that is in your booklet, the feedback and evaluation form. Please take it out and fill it out. The information is very important to us. I'm also pleased to tell you that Long Beach State Athletics has donated 600 vouchers for a general admission ticket to the baseball game at Blair Fields. The game is on Saturday, April the 2nd, and it is Long Beach State versus UC Riverside. The team, for those who don't know our baseball team, they're called Dirtbags, and we are ranked 26 in the nation. We have 600 vouchers, so for the first 600 people who return the evaluation form, you're going to get a ticket. And now finally we start with the program. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. John Husing. In your program, you have his background and only a very short list of all the successful, all the impressive activities that he can account for. One thing, though, is not stated in the program, and that is that Mrs. Husing is a graduate of CSULB with a degree in English literature. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John Husing.
I understand somebody from the ILWU is actually here tonight. What I would like to do tonight is to sort of put around this discussion some context in terms of what does it mean to the upward social mobility of blue-collar workers in Southern California if, in fact, we can solve the various issues that allows the full flowering of logistics and distribution through the ports and through the region. That is sort of my passion in life, is what does all of this mean for, in fact, the kinds of folks that do the work. The starting point for my discussion is this chart. This chart you can think of as your golf score. It's a chart that you would like to see every bar and every line go downhill. If you look at these two places on it, back in 1987, Southern California ranked 4th among the 17 major consolidated parts of our country in per capita income, a good measure of our standard of living. Today we rank 16th of the 17 areas, and actually that goes out to 2001. We're now last. We're 17th. So something is happening that is causing income within our area on a standard of living basis to not perform very well. In addition to that, if you see this black line, what this black line is what the average pay per job is in terms of our rank. As recently as 1991, we were ranked 4th. Today we are ranked 10th. So something has been happening in the economy that has not been good for average folks. When we take a look at what that is, this chart begins to show us. These are the 12 sectors of Southern California's economy which lost the most jobs between 1990 and 2003. If you can see it out there, you'll see the abbreviation MFG for manufacturing up there over and over and over again. Essentially, that's what we lost and are continuing to lose as we see jobs go elsewhere in manufacturing or just the growth of manufacturing occur outside this region. The striped or lighter colored blue bars up here are sectors that pay $40,000 a year or more in 2003. They are good paying sectors. Altogether, the jobs we lost averaged $45,165 per job. These were jobs that had a choice. They could be in Southern California or they could leave, and they have in fact left. Now, here is the opposite of that. These are the sectors that have grown. Again, the lighter color are the jobs paying $45,000 or $40,000 and above. You'll see there's many fewer of them. These are mostly sectors that are related to population growth, things like retail clerks, food service workers. If you take this whole group of jobs, they averaged $33,145. There are a lot more of them, but they averaged about $12,000 a job less. Therein lies our difficulty. Somehow we have to replace what manufacturing was offering with something that pays in that kind of a framework. Now, why did jobs leave us? This red bars on here are the workers' compensation per $100 of manufacturing payroll for the top and most expensive states in the United States, starting with Florida, until we put California on the list, which is almost double that. That cost begins to push things away from the state. Here are the most expensive energy costs in the United States till we put California on. It's the most expensive here as well, and there's a bunch of other things we could do this with. But essentially what's happened is things that can leave are tending to do so. Now, if that's the truth, why is it that California has been able to build one of the most powerful economies in the world? Essentially, it's a combination of two things. One is institutions like Cal State Long Beach, the research that goes on at places like the University of California. We tend to be at the cutting edge. That's a piece of it. The other piece of it has been the fact that everyone in this room probably has a relative, or you yourselves came here from some other state or some other part of the world. In effect, what I like to say is we all have somewhat of a loose nut in our family that migrated here. Now, what is that person? That's a risk taker. And every Californian has risk taking in your background. And, you know, if you're going to start a business and being an entrepreneur, you need to have risk taking in your background. If you put education together with risk taking, that's what's driven our economy. But today it's tending to create very high level jobs, and therefore we run into a problem. That problem is shown here. Here we see the people in Southern California with bachelor's degrees, which is about 1 out of every 4 people. Associate of Arts degrees from the community college system, about another 7%. And if we take people that had at least one college class, which is 22%, that is about 53% of our population. But notice there's a whole piece of this pie missing, and that's over here. 46.8% of Southern California's population has not had a single college class, and if you include people that didn't complete college, it's almost 70%. Now that is a huge part of our population that isn't going to be taken care of by economic development strategies that aim at high-end work for very well-educated people. And that's the group that we somehow need to figure out, how do we get jobs to them? Now, so in effect what we want is a kind of economic justice in Southern California for blue-collar workers in the form of good-paying jobs. Now, what do those jobs have to have as characteristic? Number one, there needs to be jobs that have to be in Southern California. Because otherwise they will tend to leave. We've already seen that. Number two, we need a lot of blue-collar jobs because of the educational backgrounds of the folks we're talking about, trying to take care of. Three, you want jobs with good entry-level pay, substantially above the minimum wage. Four, the jobs where there's a defined skill ladder, where maybe I come out of high school and I go to work and I make okay pay, not great, but if I stick with it, learn on the job, I can see my income go up just by experience, through on-the-job learning, in effect. And then finally, you would hope it's a sector that's using more and more information technology, because so many of our good-paying jobs in the blue-collar world are now very closely related to technology. I would suggest that most of the people in this room work in this kind of a sector in logistics and distribution. In Southern California, that group of sectors is about 550,000 jobs today. It includes wholesale trade, which is essentially warehousing and distribution, a lot of that now in the inland region where I do a lot of my work, truck transportation, courier services, general warehousing, air transportation, rail, and then the one or two folks in the room that are somehow dealing with the port types of activities, plus all the ancillary skills, the freight forwarders, the people that are driving the big rigs out on the freeway, that the big tow trucks to repair big rigs. You put all that together, it is a big sector today in Southern California. As I said, 548,278 jobs. These are what those sectors pay on the average. The lowest paying is the courier business, UPS, DHL, FedEx, a lot of part-time work, but even that is averaging $34,000 a year, on up to air transportation, water transportation, rail, up into some fairly high levels of salaries. When we put them all together and look at all 548,000 jobs, the average pay across the board is $45,314. This is good paying blue-collar work. If we relate that to the two other sectors of this type of work in California, construction, everything from folks working as laborers to the presidents of the companies, $40,004 a year. Manufacturing, $43,900, and then logistics and distribution now paying more than all of those. Now, there's a lot of folks that look at those numbers and say this is completely counterintuitive. I know when I was young, I worked in a warehouse. I pushed a cart, I had a list, and I picked things up and put it in my cart. What have you replaced? The cart, the list, and me. Other than that, it's the same stuff. Now, is there skill ladders in these fields? Well, yes, there is. I took one sector which is not particularly sexy sector, wholesale furniture, which is essentially furniture warehousing. If we look up here at the entry level, the lowest level going in is about $18,600. That compares to minimum wage of about $13,700, well above that. The average starting salary is about $25,000. Again, fairly good start for someone that doesn't have a lot of background. With experience, you climb up to $40,000 to $42,000. Again, going up, learning on the job. I had someone say, well, now wait a minute, there's a lot of people in there with bachelor's degrees and they own the companies and they're making a fortune and they distort all of this. So I took all of them out, and what I found was if you take everybody that needs a degree to work in the industry out and just looked at what's left, folks who do not have degrees, the answer is still $16 an hour in not one of the sexiest sectors of this kind of industry. Question then is, why? Why does a sector that used to be minimum wage type of work all of a sudden paying so well? And the answer is technology. If you go into a facility today, what you're going to find, first of all, is all the orders are coming by computer, because every time you buy something, it goes through a barcode reader, and that tells them what the inventory issue is and whether they're running out. So everything's ordered by computer, which means somebody at the other end has to be able to understand the computing systems to get the orders to transmit them down to the shop floors. Everybody in a large warehouse today, we have them out in the Inland Empire now that are 1,300,000 square feet. That's 30 acres with a roof on it. Everybody's got a personal digital assistant or you'd lose them. Robotic handling of goods, we're seeing more and more of that type of technology. If you're driving around in a warehouse today with a forklift, it goes up 40 feet in the air. Random product testing. A lot of the goods that you guys are all processing here through the ports, by the time they get into the warehousing, they have to be checked to make sure that, in fact, they are up to what they're supposed to be, because they're being made in Asia, and the companies ordering them want to make sure they got what they paid for. A truck driver leaves a warehouse. That truck driver has on the screen a geographic information map saying where to go. Somebody had to put the data on the truck. The driver also has a keyboard so they can be talking back and forth over the internet to where they're coming from. Laser scanners all over the place within the business, which means today somebody's got to calibrate it, keep it going. Every container, as you guys know more than I do, global positioning, we can now track containers no matter where they are. Internet communications is everywhere. Manufacturing is even now going on inside the warehousing. Put all that together and you have a very sophisticated sector getting very efficient and paying well as a consequence. Does it have a long-term future? This is a chart over time, and you'll notice it's getting lower and lower, of the amount of inventory companies are keeping in their warehouses near where they're selling things. Notice it's getting lower and lower and lower. Why? Because just-in-time inventory control, the computers know when they need it, and they order it only when they need it. But the result of that is tremendous pressure on the business of logistics and distribution, because your client is running out of stuff when they order it. That's why they're ordering it. Then you have this little monster, the post-Panamax ship. There are 4 harbors in the whole section of the New World on the Pacific side, from Tierra del Fuego at the tip of South America up to Nome, Alaska, that can take a post-Panamax ship with its 8,200 containers. That ship, when you unload it, is 37 double-stacked trains that are 1.25 miles long. Extraordinary, and has to come to Southern California or Seattle or Vancouver, because there's nowhere else to put it. Now, if we look at this chart, the red bars on here have happened. This is the growth of trade that you're all dealing with here through the harbors, up to 13.1 million TEUs last year. The forecast is for 17 in 2010. We're already getting ahead of that forecast, and it's going up to 22 million up in 2025. So you see the extraordinary growth of this industry and its job potential. Now, another sign of the growth of the industry is what's going on with e-commerce. I picked 2 years, 2001, 2002. Why? Crummy years in the economy. These were recession years. But you can see that there was a big increase in e-commerce. Most of you probably ordered something off the internet this year for Christmas. It was a 41% increase in the middle of the recession. And that's logistics and distribution to virtually every house. So if we can accommodate this trade, we have extraordinary potential to be able to not only have the 550,000 jobs we've got, but to take and add another 503,000 going out to 2020, which would be really supplying the kind of work to that group of people that I was talking about at the beginning. Not only that, the infrastructure implied by what you need to do at the harbors, need to do on the roads, etc., would create thousands of construction jobs. In effect, there is an extraordinary potential economic development strategy for Southern California aimed straight at blue-collar workers. One issue, can we unload the ships? Another issue, can we separate the trucks and the cars? I drove here from the Inland Empire today. 3 trucks tried to get me. In a way, I figure it now, the way the trade's going, if one of them had a shot at me now, by 2015 there'll be 2 and they're going to get me. We have a railroad track capacity problem. We're at 112 average freight trains a day in 2000s, going up to 2010. It'll go be at 165 a day, going up to 2050 and 2025. We haven't got the track to be able to handle that. Then any of you that live anywhere near a railroad train, you get to hear it all night, particularly at 3 a.m. I happen to live on the track. I want that fixed. Then there are the intermodal container facilities, whether it's Hobart down here, Santa Fe Intermodal out San Bernardino, UPS, or UPSP. Every single one of those facilities is straining against capacity and needs to be expanded. In 2003, 1,284,000 containers were towed by truck from the harbors to the Inland Empire to go into warehousing and distribution facilities out there. Well, the fact of the matter is, that's a lot of truck traffic that if we could come up with a inland port and move it from here to there by rail, you'd get those trucks off the road in both directions. That's almost 2.5 million truck trips. And then there is this issue, which is absolutely checkmate. If we don't solve this, we don't solve the rest of it. And that is, that's gorgeous. Do we have that kind of air quality, or do we have this kind of air quality? The ultimate problem for all of this is not the fact that we don't want to solve this whole group of issues. It's where's the money going to come from? And certainly one of the problems we have in Southern California is there isn't going to be enough local public money to take care of it. Let me just take a look at one piece of research, and I'll finish with this couple of things. Let us say for a moment that we could make it profitable to the trucking industry to build 2 truck lanes dedicated to trucks from the harbors to Nevada. This is research done by the Reason Foundation. If you have those dedicated truck lanes where there are no cars involved, and you said to the industry, fine, go ahead and triple trailer and even go faster. As long as I'm not there, I don't care. Now, what takes place? Well, that increase in efficiency to the truckers increases profitability to the industry, part of which we would say, fine, you keep it, you deserve it, you make more money, but also let's put a fee on using the road, which is sufficient to build the road. Turns out the numbers will allow you to do both. Not only that, let's have you install the cleanest engine technology. Again, it is feasible to do that. And then finally, we say to the Highway Patrol, here's a little bundle of money, and any trucker that tries to leave in a triple trailer configuration onto city streets, well, I said shoot them once, but the head of the CHP didn't like that, so do something bad to them. But the fact of the matter is we can do all of this if, in fact, we can give an upside to the industry, then we can get industry participating in the financing. The other piece is the federal responsibility. All of this trade coming into Southern California, a good part of it is to be able to make a cheaper television set for somebody out in Iowa. At some point, part of the funds that are being raised here need to be put back into the infrastructure that all of us have to work with. Just because they're a blue state doesn't mean they get this dump on us. Now, over the period of time, leaders have changed our economy. The interstate freeway system was built by a conservative president, Dwight Eisenhower. The State Water Project by a moderate Democrat, Governor Brown. What we need is that kind of political leadership to put together this particular solution to all of that group of problems at one time. If we can do that, I suggest to you we can put the gold back in Southern California's economy, and frankly, we owe it to our blue-collar workers to do it. This has been a great opportunity, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John, for a very exciting and dynamic presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, as Dr. Husing demonstrated, the goods movement industry has historically played a very important role to the economic well-being here in Southern California. And it's very likely to play an even greater role as other industries and other opportunities for economic mobility move elsewhere. But the goods movement industry cannot afford to leave it. It cannot be compliant. It has to be here it will be here to stay. This year's town hall video presented once again by CSULB's Advanced Media Production, led by Dave Kelly, summarizes the causes and the impact of the 2004 goods movement crisis. The events are too recent to have been forgotten, particularly by those in the room. But the images and a good reminder of what the future may bring will happen if the events are not too coordinated. By now I'm putting my glasses on so I can see what I'm reading. While you will hear from people who suffered from stressed networks, delays in schedules, and last-minute changes. You will also hear from new hiring procedures that are already on the way to help out at the docks and at the rail yards with the labor shortage. You also will hear some optimism about the potential for extended hours, the impact of new technology, environmental regulations, and this is important because while it is useful to be reminded about what has occurred, the real purpose of the video is to stimulate the conversation that follows. The panel discussion will focus on solutions. As revisiting the problems of 2004 has no value if it does not bring about changes in 2005. One more thing, the video as well as the discussions that follow are accessible on the web as well. I encourage you to share this with your colleagues, and we believe it is a great educational tool. And now, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the video. Thank you.
As many as 50 ships anchored in the water. No movement for days at a time. Some ships taking 10 days to unload. Not enough freight trains. Retailers waiting anxiously. Delivery costs going up. Merchandise not getting to the market. Consumers finding shelves empty. Demand for goods continuing to increase. Is this a preview of things to come? Will Southern California suffer perennially with inefficient goods movement when growth doubles and triples in the years ahead? Will the shipping industry and major retailers find ways to bypass Southern California's ports and warehouses? Or has the goods movement industry learned valuable lessons about working together to plan for the future? The crisis of 2004 was a wake-up call for the region, the nation, and the world.
If it becomes too costly to deliver product through these ports, then the large shippers have already indicated a willingness to distribute product elsewhere. I mean, it's well known that Walmart is distributing part of its product that initially was destined through our ports and now goes to the Port of Savannah. If you're looking at the decision from an economic point of view of having a vessel sit out there for 10 days, or you're looking at having that vessel go through the Panama Canal to a port in Savannah, then the calculation will make some sense at certain times.
The recent goods movement crisis forced participants in the global supply chain to rethink how they do business in Southern California. While many of the world's major ports experienced increased levels of congestion, local ports were particularly hard hit. The crisis magnified the already integral role these ports play in bringing foreign-made products to the U.S. market. Over the course of 5 months, over 100 ships were diverted from Los Angeles and Long Beach to other ports north, south, and east. The primary recipients were the ports of Oakland and Seattle-Tacoma. Some of the diverted ships and cargo may never come back to Southern California. As larger ships delivered more containers than ever before, trucks were caught in delays and could not keep up with the growing stacks of loads piling up at the docks. Ships at anchor burned more bunker fuel than necessary while waiting to unload, adding to the concerns about air quality. Every day that a ship sat idle in the water cost the shipping company between $50,000 to $100,000. Growth in cargo placed renewed pressure on a stressed rail system and highway network. The situation highlighted the need for terminal operators and the ILWU to work together, hiring sufficient numbers of well-trained workers to move goods from ship to dock and out of the ports. Retailers saw their plans for stocking the holiday shelves and advertising merchandise sales adversely affected. Some stores scrambled to obtain their goods before the Thanksgiving weekend. the cost of delivering and receiving imported products continue to rise. This trend is likely to continue, reversing a 2-decade-long windfall for consumers, where goods transportation costs were marginalized or in decline. Warehousing time and costs will increase, and the just-in-time delivery strategy will be seriously challenged if greater efficiency is not achieved.
A 7-day delay for us means that all of our plans that are dependent upon the precise timing of goods arriving at a port, getting on a rail if they need to get on a rail, getting into a distribution center, and then getting to that store on time, all of that is now up in the air. You just don't know. It leads to things like extra overtime, extra shifts. As most of our customers know, we run primary catalogs, circulars, and toy books as we go into our holiday time. Tremendous amounts of toys, specific toys get sold. Our stores can't hold all of that, so we time very carefully the waves of these products that move into those stores to satisfy that demand. And when now you're 7 days off, that 7 days might be the length of the second wave, and it can potentially put you at risk of not having your goods in the stores at the time you need to have them there.
Larger ships are now bringing in at least 8,000 20-foot equivalent units with each port delivery. This is roughly 4,000 40-foot-long container boxes. Under current conditions, these supersized loads are straining capacity at most terminals where dockside land is at a premium. The nonstop growth in new manufactured goods arriving from the Far East indicates port traffic at LA Long Beach will continue to expand by 8 to 12% annually. Even assuming that some overflow ships could be diverted to other West Coast ports, the ceaseless growth phenomenon would soon saturate those ports as well. In the wake of the goods movement crisis, many stakeholders have begun to take steps to put the crisis behind them and prepare for next year. The railroads have hired thousands of new employees to operate more trains on added track. Many suggest that increasing the number of trains and constructing more rail lines will significantly relieve long-term concerns about cargo congestion.
I think the principal advantage of rail, if used and orchestrated properly, is to relieve the freeways of the congestions that would otherwise be caused by the use of trucks. Rail is less polluting than the equivalent number of trucks that it transports. A single container train can carry between 250 and 280 containers. That's 250 or 280 truck trips that are removed from the freeway. So 3 to 4 locomotives can haul that cargo, and that equipment, the locomotives themselves, are far less polluting than the equivalent number of trucks. Also, locomotives are far more energy efficient than trucks. And in terms of capacity, to add rail capacity to a system is far less expensive on a per mile basis than the equivalent highway expenditure for the equivalent number of trucks that a train can carry.
Another source of congestion at the terminals was the inadequate supply of longshore labor available to service the container movement requirements. As a result, the PMA and ILWU cooperated to add about 1,800 experienced workers to the permanent labor pool since the crisis. Over 3,000 more of the part-time workers, known as casuals, have also been added to the labor supply. Continually adding more trained workers for more shifts should assist in speeding up container transport. The PMA is utilizing new monthly estimating procedures that will help predict future hiring needs with greater accuracy.
One of the things that we really focused on as we got into this whole backlog situation and the labor supply, and do we have enough, not only enough longshoremen in general, but do we have enough foremen, do we have enough clerks, do we have enough trained and skilled guys, is we needed to develop metrics that allowed us the visibility to the industry to be able to, dive down into it and really dissect it and say, if this happens and we need 100 more of these and 200 more of those, and really start being proactive about managing growth going forward. And we have done that. And it has really been an eye-opener for not only, I think, the industry in general, but people that are trying to manage it on a very tactical allocation basis. It gives them a tool to use.
I think we need to really expand our training and even doing some retraining. But I think the key in this industry and with the railroads and elsewhere is to develop that skill level that's necessary, which takes you some time, some money, some training, so it doesn't happen just overnight. But to develop a skilled worker in all the different categories could take anywhere 3, 6, 9 months. I mean, if you wanted a guy who could drive a lift and a heavy lift and a UTR and a crane and all this stuff, it takes people years to reach competency on all the different skill levels. That's really needs to be accelerated in the industry.
The issue of efficient goods movement has 3 related corollaries. The first is the specified hours of loading and delivery. The second is the impact on communities and the environment. And the third is the need for greater security as goods are moved round the clock. Both private industry and elected representatives are searching for solutions to mitigate the problems of port congestion and the increasing truck traffic on freeways and surrounding harbor access roads. Rising levels of potentially hazardous air pollution generated by expanding port activity are also a major health concern for local communities. The demands of trade growth will force solutions on terminal operators and warehousing facilities, invariably requiring extended hours of operation. If industry doesn't develop a viable solution with economic incentives for after-hours operations, the state legislature will enact new laws mandating fines for marine terminals where trucks idle for extended periods.
As far as gate activity and trucks coming into and out of the terminals, it's basically a 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Proposition at this point. The Pier Pass program really encourages pickups after hours. The industry really has initiated this by establishing this Pier Pass program. It's a special entity that will be collecting revenue from all the truck trips throughout the day and then rebating those truck trips that occur during the off hours. Again, it's a way to spread the volume throughout the day. We hope that it will have air quality benefits where you're not going to have this congested terminal and congested freeways during compressed hours of the day, and really spread that volume throughout and really wring some more efficiencies out of the existing infrastructure and the terminals that we currently have.
New technology at gates will allow for greater scrutiny of drivers and loads. The new automated check-in systems can track drivers and loads on a security-approved database. If the load and driver are cleared by the tracking system, efficiency is served and security is maintained. Larger vessels are creating new concerns for the LA Long Beach Harbor. Though some of the terminals can handle the larger ships, the amount of cargo they hold can require as much as 140 acres on dockside. Multiple ships in port pose a land storage problem. Efficient movement of trucks and rail cars while unloading the larger ships will be critical in keeping land use manageable. The new tracking technology is one way to make land use more efficient.
The advantage of having extended gate hours is that our terminals cannot really grow much anymore. We've pretty much maxed out on the amount of land that we have available in both ports. We're able to grow a little bit in LA, and I think Long Beach probably a little more. But as these big mega ships, these 8,000, 9,000 TEU vessels start to arrive, they take up a lot more space, and we need to turn the cargo quickly. We need to make this a transit dock, not a storage dock at all these facilities. The ideal situation is get your container off the ship, pick it up, and leave, whether it goes out on rail or goes out by truck.
Despite the challenges, the industry did manage to move large volumes of cargo during 2004 and did get most goods to store shelves by Christmas. Cooperation among the stakeholders was vital, but similar challenges are around the corner. The future of Southern California's ports will require a political consensus. Essential infrastructure improvements for roads, bridges, freeways, and rails could easily cost $16.5 billion. Growth in trade fueled by consumer demand will have to be balanced by concern for congestion relief and environmental mitigation. Trade is now a major engine driving the Southern California economy. The global logistics chain weaves through the ports on its way across the basins, valleys, and deserts of California. Jobs and economic vitality are at stake throughout the region and the state. Yet the air quality, already considered hazardous in many areas, will suffer even more from population growth and expanding goods movement unless stakeholders continue to work together toward common goals. Getting products to store shelves in the Midwest and beyond involves entry and delivery through California. In that respect, the challenges facing the local ports are also the nation's challenges. The Federal Department of Transportation is opening an office in Long Beach as part of the Southern California Gateway Initiative to keep the goods flowing rapidly to all parts of the country. The pool of stakeholders continues to expand, now encompassing Sacramento and Washington, D.C., as well as all of the consumers in the states affected by cargo trade. As a national concern, the growth of goods movement will depend on federal, state, and local agencies working together, along with labor, shipping, trucking, warehousing, and retailing. Elected representatives, regulatory groups, and community activists have a role ensuring safety, health, and quality of life. The balancing act will continue as far as the eye can see.
Good evening. I'm your moderator for this evening. I'd like the panelists to please come up and take their seats while I lay out some of the ground rules so we can move through this and get as many of your questions in as we can. It is now 7:10. We're going to have approximately an hour of questions, maybe a little more, if there's a lot of excitement and lots of good questions. First of all, I'm going to introduce your panelists, but I will keep the introductions deliberately brief and just suggest that you read the full bios. And I'm going to start with a question to each of the panelists, and I will then open the floor to questions from the audience. And that's when we begin the Q&A part of the program. As I said, I'll accept the last question somewhere between 8:15 and 8:30. In terms of how we will proceed with the actual Q&A part of the evening, I want to direct your attention to page 2 and 3 in the program, where you'll find the guidelines that we established for the Q&A section of the program. When you want to ask a question, please go to the microphones situated in the handicap stalls on the left and right of the house. And they're in glass there and over there. There's a microphone there. You give your name, your affiliation, and address your question to a specific panel member. Please keep your question brief. Don't take the time to make a statement. What we want you to do is to get as much information as you can out of our panelists in the time that we have available to us this evening. So don't give us any long-winded presentations disguised as a question. Second thing is no multi-part questions. No discussions concerning specific terminals or operations. No questions about specific issues currently under negotiation between the union and the employers. And if you just would prefer to submit your question by card, we have ushers who will be handing out 3x5 cards, and you can write your question down and they will be brought to me, and I will intersperse those questions with the questions from the people who are asking directly. Final thing is, please stick with today's topic, which is congestion and goods movement. Last year we had a great discussion about the environment. This is not the evening to talk about the environment. We're just going to keep it on goods movement. Let's see. So, with that, I'm actually going to start the questions, and I'm going to begin the process by, as I said, asking the same question of each panelist to get the ball rolling. And first I will turn to John Ficker, who is president of the National Industrial Transportation League, and who has travelled the furthest to be here. And he is speaking here really on behalf of the shippers, or at least speaking from the shippers' perspective. And John, the question is, in recent years we've experienced three major industry crises in the industry. The UP meltdown in 1998, the lockout in 2002, and the peak season crisis in 2004, apparently caused by a shortage of longshore labour. Do we detect a pattern here? And my question for the panellists is, from your perspective, What situation or circumstance might cause a fourth crisis in the industry? And again, from your perspective, how do you anticipate that your members will respond to a similar crisis this year?
If that isn't a loaded question, I don't know what is. I think I look at capacity constraints in two perspectives, and this is a capacity constraint with one other caveat. The first one is that we have a shortage of actual infrastructure. There are significant needs to be dealt with the concrete, asphalt, rail, and dockside facilities that are not adequate to handle the volume. But the second capacity problem we face is an infrastructure, or excuse me, a human resource problem. And I believe that those two combined can create some real challenges for us. And third, as you all just experienced out here in Southern California in the last 60 days, it can rain in Southern California despite what the song says. And you could have a weather issue even create some more challenge for you, or some natural impediment that could happen that could drive the operating systems in this fragile infrastructure into a tizzy, if you will. I think from a shippers or users or a beneficial owner of the goods perspective, the most incredible thing that I have ever seen in my 35 years in this industry is the ingenuity, creativity, and flexibility of the users of the transportation system to respond to whatever roadblock is thrown at them. As we saw during the UP meltdown in '98, trucking came out of the woodwork and saved the day. As we saw in the last 2004 crisis, ships were diverted, cargo was moved. So when you went to the store, it was there, but it was the creativity and ingenuity of people to do that. I think there's a lot more planning going on this year. I think there's a lot more contingency plans, and the contingency plans, I believe, are much more on the front burner than they have ever been in the past. I think the experience of 2004 will drive people in 2005 to be prepared for whatever crisis they may be thrown, provided it's not monumental.
Thank you. I'm now going to pose the same question to Doug Tilden. Doug, can you see a situation arising this year that would give rise to yet another crisis in goods movement in Southern California?
Yeah, unfortunately I do, and I certainly hope that I'm proven wrong on this. 2004 was obviously a very difficult year, but I believe that the issues we're going to face in 2005 are very different in their complexion and their complexity. In fact, I think that what happened in 2004 with the mistiming of the availability of labor to work vessels, in fact, masked a much larger problem that's going to emerge in 2005. And John just hit on it, and that's infrastructure. I gave a speech to the Retail Industry Leaders Association 3 weeks ago at their annual meeting in San Diego, and the title of my speech was 2005, the Year of Infrastructure. And I started out the speech by pointing out that during the peak season last year, and I went back to PMA records, we kept between 100 and 150,000 loaded containers sitting on those ships that were idle in the film that we just saw. We have sufficient labor this year to work the vessels on arrival, which means we will dump that freight onto the infrastructure in Southern California. And the forecast is that we will see somewhere between 10 to 14% growth, which will probably put about another 1.42 million TEUs on an already overburdened infrastructure in Southern California. So I really believe that this is the year that we're going to see incredible focus on the infrastructure issues in Southern California in all of their complexity, both the marine facilities, the road infrastructure, the road connectors, the availability of trucks, the rail connectors and rail infrastructure. I believe this is the year that we're really going to see a lot of attention and significant issues with infrastructure.
Thank you, Doug. Let me ask you a quick follow-up. Is there anything that your industry segment can do to head off this crisis that you see coming?
We're doing a lot of things, and Pier Pass has been mentioned. That effectively will double gate capacity. But, it's going to take some time before the full effect of Pier Pass is felt, because it means that we have to have a corresponding reaction and change in behavior of a lot of distribution centers to maximize the additional gate capacity that we're creating. This is the year that we will be implementing a lot of the technological improvements on the marine facilities. Most of the terminals have implemented optical character recognition, and there was at the gates, and there was a picture of that in the film that we saw, but that doesn't do any good to process the trucks faster through the gates unless we can process them faster through the terminals. So certainly Pier Pass, the implementation of additional technology on the terminals will help, but in my own opinion, I don't think it's going to be sufficient to resolve the issues. And I also disagree with the point of view that's been mentioned by many people that we can divert our way out of this problem. I put a slide up for the Retail Industry Leaders Association of the major ports in the United States. The Southern California Port Complex handled 13.2 million TEUs last year. The next largest port in the United States is New York, New Jersey at slightly over 4 million. And then the size of the ports falls away relatively rapidly to the range of 1.6 to maybe 2 million TEUs. The growth in Southern California alone will be about the size of one of the major ports on the east coast of the United States. So we're not going to divert our way out of this problem either. We have to deal with it here in the Southern California Port Complex.
Thank you. Just quickly, could I ask all of you who have cell phones with you to either turn them off or put them on vibrate so that they don't keep ringing out? Okay, next question goes to Dave Arian, and Dave, it's the same question. From your perspective, what do you think might be the cause of the next crisis that we're going to see in the goods movement industry this year, or the forthcoming years?
Well, first, I'd like to thank all of you from the ILWU that showed up tonight. You're the ones that make the waterfront move, and you're the ones that make this forum a success. So I'd like to thank you all for being here tonight. I think the critical questions, and I think we're all going to be talking about the same thing. I want to start out by saying, you know, when I started on the waterfront, my dad, and even before I started on the waterfront, my dad told me a story about how you had to look at the world. And he says, most of us are like a frog in a well, and all we see is that little patch of blue above us. And when you climb out of that well, you begin to see the whole world. As members of the Longshore Union, we don't just look at what exists in the hatch. We've climbed out of the hatch, and we look at the whole transportation situation. And although we're just one stakeholder in it, the key, and I'll say this over and over again tonight, the key is how each section of the transportation industry is able to live up to its responsibilities, to be able to improve on how they do their job and how we coordinate from China to Walmart and everything in between. And to me, that's the key to where we're going. Now, has the industry and has the transportation chain developed that level of cooperation yet? No. And I think that's what we're facing. Our next crisis will come as a result of our inability to coordinate our activities, not only between the ILWU and the PMA, but between the railroads, the truckers, the carriers, the production centers of China, and the distribution centers of Walmart and elsewhere. One other point that I want to make. The key to the waterfront, and this doesn't come from me, there's been some papers developed within the ILWU, Peter Payton and others, on the question of how do we increase capacity? How do we increase velocity, which is how fast we can move that cargo? And how do we have the flexibility so that when these crises come, we're able to deal with them? And I'll get into that more maybe when other questions are raised. But I think the key to capacity in our port is not only the question of infrastructure, but how we move cargo, first off the ship and then out of the terminal. The ILWU raised in the past the idea of staging areas, inland ports, improving the condition for the truckers. Instead of 1.4 moves, there should be at least 4 moves each shift in order to create that velocity that's necessary, the 24/7 that hasn't come yet, and a series of other things. But are we headed for another crisis? Well, I don't see it as a crisis. I see it as a challenge, and there's going to be a challenge each and every year until we're able to deal with the question of the infrastructure and the coordination I've been talking about.
Dave, let me ask a quick follow-up. Do you see anything that even suggests a whiff of cooperation between all of the players?
Well, I can only start from the frog in the well, and there's two frogs down there. One's us and one's the PMA. And we keep hopping over each other right now. But the PMA, the representative, will talk in a minute. One of the problems that we ran into was the restructuring of the PMA during the last contract and the lockout that took place. And since then, we've been trying to repair the relationship between the two organizations. I think the new leadership on the PMA side has been making efforts to do that. I think they have difficulty on their side as we do on ours. But I think the starting point is that cooperation. And in our industry, it came around the question of hiring. We now have 7,000 registered members of our local. We now have 7,000 casuals, moving to the 8,000 number in processing. The clerks have increased their numbers. The foremen have increased their numbers. The key question now, as you saw in the videotape for us with the PMA, is supplying sufficient skilled workers. And the training programs have to be accelerated, and we have to develop a higher level of skills on the waterfront in order to meet the needs. Our shortages the last 6 months have been in crane drivers and skilled equipment operators such as top handlers and even CLs. And so we're attempting to work with the PMA to do that. For the rest of the transportation chain, I can't speak.
Okay.
The other people on this panel will.
Well, hopefully someday you will be able to speak to that when folks are talking. Next person to ask that question of is Tom Harold. Tom, from your perspective, do you see yet another crisis coming in the industry at some point this year, next year, or in the near future?
Another crisis. Yes. Probably the biggest thing from an industry point of view that I see is that if there's another issue in any kind of security, we're still, as far as I'm concerned, as an industry, too lax when it comes to security at the terminal. And we really need to take a hard look at that. As Tommy Warren said in the video, we don't need the terminals to be storage areas. And as a liner group, we probably are the worst ones to offend that. We allow our customers to dictate that they want to use the terminal as a storage area. We need to move the cargo out. It's up to the liner services to work with the customers. I just came out of a 2-year stint working in the sales department. The movement of goods has to move quickly. Once it hits the dock, it's available, it's got to move. We can blame a lot of people on the infrastructure. We can blame the rails, the trucks. We can blame everybody. But at the end of the day, if the cargo is not ready to move when it hits the dock, we can't do it.
Thank you. A quick follow-up for you there. Do you see anything that your segment of the industry could do that would help other parts of the chain in terms of what they're doing to move things along better?
Well, this is the typical time of the year when most Trans-Pacific contracts are beginning to be negotiated. And I think, again, we, as a group, need to take a look at extended free time on terminals and somehow squeeze that down a bit. The terminals themselves they got proposals on the table to reduce the time. Is that the correct answer? I'm not so sure, but it is a discipline that we need to get away from and into movement of the cargo. Okay,
thank you. Stacy, it's your turn. Same question. What do you see what do you see that might cause a crisis in the industry in the forthcoming years?
Well, from the trucking industry perspective, one of the main problems that we're looking at right now at the ports is just a shortage in truck capacity. And when I say truck capacity, I mean that the trucks just aren't available to move the amount of cargo that we have coming through the ports. Statewide, since 1993, in-state-based truck registrations have actually declined from about 680,000 down to around 350,000, and that's just since 1993. If you look at the rest of the nation and out-of-state based truck registrations that can actually come into California and haul our freight here, it has actually gone up from about 1 million to about 1.4 million. So the amount of trucks we actually have available to haul freight at the ports is on a steady decline year by year.
And that's what you see as being the problem?
That's what we see as being the problem, and the problem is caused by the rate structure. I mean, drivers are not going to drive where it's not profitable. And if you can clap at that, that's all right. And just like with any other business, it's a trickle-down effect. I mean, if the rate structure continues to be so that the driver can't be profitable, there aren't going to be drivers out there willing to haul freight at the ports. If it were profitable, they would be doing it, and we would be seeing people come in and we used to see truck driving go from generation to generation, and it'd be an actual employment opportunity that somebody would want to have, but it's just not profitable the way it needs to be to incentivize drivers to work at the ports.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to give me since we're taking a lot of time here, a 30-second response. Is there anything that CTA or the trucking industry could do that would make a really positive impact on the current problems confronting the industry?
That's a good question. The trucking industry, and I hate to use this terminology, but the trucking industry, we kind of feel like we're at the bottom of the food chain at the port operation. And CTA right now, what we're working on is just trying to keep lines of communication open, but also we're working on things legislatively to try to level that playing field. Here and there, we're taking little bites out of the apple, but we're doing what we can from that respect. But like I said, with the trickle-down effect, we can only trickle down to the drivers what's trickled down to us from those that pay our rates.
Okay, thank you. Turning quickly to Steve Hennessy with PMA. Steve.
Hey. Stop. No politics here, all right? No partisanism. We're all here for the same reason.
Can't believe that you brought
Okay, Steve. Quickly, from your perspective, what do you see that could be a cause of another crisis in the industry, either this year or over the next couple of years?
You know, I really do feel it's the infrastructure issue that everybody else has touched on. We've worked very hard, as Dave mentioned, to bring people into the industry. We've also worked very hard to understand the forecasting and what we can expect in 2005. In January, we saw 14% growth in volume year over year in Southern California. In week 9, we put out 37,000 shifts. When we had the backlog at its peak last year, our goal was to work 38,000 shifts to work down the backlog. We put out 37,000 shifts in 1 week in February. The volume's coming. The demand for labor is coming. If we have the velocity through the terminals, we're going to see a much bigger burden on the infrastructure. If you reduce the terminal congestion, and we attribute terminal congestion last year to reducing productivity in the terminals by 9%, so that 9% productivity comes back, you have the velocity and the movement of boxes associated with that. It's really going to be a challenge on the infrastructure to keep up with it.
Okay. I'm going to move quickly to our final panelist, George Fetty. And George, I'm going to ask you the same question. What do you see? And I know that you and I have had a conversation about rail and what the challenges are at rail. From your perspective and from rail's perspective, what do you see as the real challenge this year and the forthcoming years in terms of the next crisis in the industry?
The railroads are scrambling to increase their line capacity. Burlington Northern Santa Fe is adding a third track up through the Cajon Pass. Union Pacific is building a second main track, 250 miles between here and El Paso. That route will be 64% completed by the end of 2007. And by the end of the decade, the Burlington Northern Santa Fe will have 2 tracks all the way to Chicago. I think they're reacting by hiring people. They're reacting by buying equipment. They're adding track. They don't have to go through an EIR process to do that. and so they just get out there and they build it. I believe, though, that the crisis that looms in the rail side is out there around 2009 or 2010, and I believe that is going to be driven by the lack of intermodal lift capacity. Taking the growth rates in the two San Pedro Bay ports and using a on-dock load rate of 22% of all containers, and then what we know to be online and the business processes that may be changed to drive more throughput, by my calculations, in about 2010, we're going to be out of intermodal lift capacity. And I think that's the looming crisis out there, and the implications for that are profound. Namely, it may go over our freeways to the high desert and be loaded. So that's what I see.
And are there any short-term changes that rail could make that would be of assistance to the industry in general?
What the railroads are doing are changing their business practices and processes to drive more throughput through their existing intermodal facilities. They're limiting dwell time. They're penalizing anyone who uses their property. They're going to new processes such as live loading, where a container comes in and it goes trackside and gets loaded on the rail car rather than going to a storage area and then get loaded. This is going to drive throughput. They're going vertical. They usually operate their intermodal facilities with everything having wheels underneath it. They have decided to bite the bullet and go vertical, even though it's more expensive to stack and then unstack. But these are the things, countermeasures, that they're using to drive more throughput. Not very long ago, Burlington Northern Santa Fe thought that their Hobart facility would max out at 1 million units. Last year they did 1,318,000 there, and they think they can ramp it up to 2 million with new business processes. So those are the things that the railroads are looking at doing, driving more throughput in the existing facilities, and they're also planning for expansions and or new facilities. But there's a limit to when those will come on, or there's a limit to how quickly they can come online, and they're going to fill up very quickly.
Okay,
so business processes are the thing that they're focusing on now.
Okay, thank you. At this point, I want to throw it open to the floor. Is there anybody at the mic on the right? I don't see anybody. Or I have somebody coming to the mic on the left-hand side. Please give your name and your affiliation and your question, please, and the person to whom you're directing the question.
Paul Sanchez, 8192, ILW, Longshore Local 13, Executive Board. I'd like to address this to the PMA. You know, I keep hearing this buzzword, logistics, and to me, basically, it's just cost-cutting, all aspects of cargo handling and transit management, making it as efficient as possible. We talk a lot about handling cargo. Well, you got the best damn cowboys and cowgirls in the whole wide show right here. If you turn them loose, okay, but you offer them 24-hour gates. The problem isn't turning the cargo to the dock. The cargo is alleviated once the congestion goes on the dock. The infrastructure is taking it from the terminals to the consumers throughout the United States. We've got a record deficit, sir, something like 413
Okay, I'm going to need you to get to an actual question.
Yes, okay. We've got a big trade deficit. What's $100 billion more to put into the highways so we can get this stuff moving? Plain and simple. And in my opinion, the PMA should be petitioning the federal government to get these funds for the waterfront.
Let's see if I have a chance to answer the question if you can. I don't know if you can speak on behalf of the federal government, though.
Well, you know, it really is. There are some serious funding issues. There's no doubt about it. And where we get the funds from, I don't know that anybody's actually certain. I've heard a number of different groups say different things that are conflicting. If we can work as an industry, as a group, as a whole, and have some common ground and thoughts on where the funding should come from, then we're better positioned to lobby that group for the funds. So I really think it's getting the right people in the room, understanding what the issues are and what we think we should do from a funding standpoint, and then going out and trying to solicit it from the right groups.
Okay, thank you. Next question I have on a card here. It's addressed to Tom Harold. I'd actually like Doug Tilden as well as Tom Harold to take a crack at this one. How will the surge on the terminals and on the gates caused by the megaships impact the carriers? But let me ask that further, impact the infrastructure in the areas surrounding the ports. Tom, if you would take it first, and then Doug.
Obviously the first position would be that the terminals would be extremely congested, which we've experienced over the past year. There used to be a traditional peak season that started about mid to late September and went through about the end of, around Thanksgiving, so the end of November. But as over the past 4 or 5 years, especially the company I work for, we don't really see a peak season. It's peak. It's been peak. It hasn't stopped. We see a little dip right around the holidays. You see a little dip around Chinese New Year, but then the traditional volume comes right back. The mega ships coming in, that's an interesting phenomenon in itself. Look at it, I think the economies of scale from a carrier's point of view are probably there, but then when you discount the fact that you may not get as many ship turns on that particular string, it's got to impact your financial bottom line. Your congestion, again, it's very interesting because the customers in the Midwest, unless you're a Walmart or a Target, they don't really understand what goes on out on the West Coast. And when you get customers calling you saying, well, why is my cargo still sitting in L.A.? It's come off the ship. Or now the normal question was, why is my cargo still sitting in L.A.? The ship got there 3 days ago. Well, you don't just come out and dump these ships like a box of Tinker Toys. You have to take these off in a scheduled time. After you explain that to them, they probably might understand, especially some of the mid-sized customers. Chassis shortages, we've all had that over the years. But I think the biggest thing will be the congestion again at the terminal.
Okay. Doug, you want to throw in your 2 cents worth?
Yeah, I mean, I support everything that was just said. The dynamics of working an 8,000 TEU ships are very different than working 2 4,000 TEU ships in a week. The numbers that were quoted in the film presentation we saw, where you need 140 dedicated acres to work a 8,000 TEU ship, is pretty accurate. And there aren't a lot of terminals around here that can dedicate 140 acres to a single vessel call per week. It also compounds into the discussion we've been having about demurrage and storage on the terminals. The way the current rules work is free time starts once the ship finishes discharge. We bring in an 8,000 TEU ship versus a 4,000 TEU ship. That's going to take twice as long. And we see some of the 8,000 TEU ships taking 6 and 7 days to complete work. Well, that's allowing 6 and 7 more days of free storage on the terminals, which is just going to aggravate further the congestion. And I certainly hope, and I'm looking at Dick here, that CAPA takes action on the current proposals that are before it relating to reduction of free time and changing the way we count free time. There is a proposal to start counting free time from the point of discharge. If we don't do that with the onslaught of 8,000 TEU ships, we'll actually be setting ourselves backwards in terms of using the facilities for free storage.
Okay, thank you. Dave, I know you want to jump in real fast on that. Go ahead.
Just wanted to comment. One of the things that I've seen, I've been on the waterfront for 40 years, and when we started on the waterfront, the concept was keep the hook moving. Move the cargo off the ship as quick as possible and out the gate as quick as possible. Now our crane drivers will sort cargo under the hook off the ship. You don't move from inshore to offshore, following each container in the most productive manner possible. There's hot cargo. There's a lot of cargo sorted on the port, on the terminal, under the hook. We never saw this until the last 4 or 5 years, and it's expanding. In addition to that, many of the companies and the business decisions they make are based on their profitability, based on who their clients are, and what containers come off the ship first, what the containers go on the rail first, what containers go out of the gate first, and some company might leave a container on a facility for 2 to 3 or 4 weeks. This stuff's got to be cleaned up. Do you want productivity? Do you want to move cargo? And if you want to move cargo, there may be a conflict or a contradiction between moving cargo and how each company sees making their profitability. And I think this is something that's got to be examined when we look at, the backlog of cargo in many of these terminals, because I'll tell you, it's changed since I came on the waterfront.
Okay, thanks, Dave. I have a question here on my left.
Yeah, my name is Andrew Yaksich, 130478 LW. Anyway, this is aimed at the PMA. You talked about a 9% decrease in productivity from the union, but you continue to take our manning away. You took the fourth man under the hook, and you take away our bosses, and you're throwing our safety out the door. So why don't you let us work the way we were meant to work?
We absolutely want to make sure that you're in an environment that you can work safely and that you do not have...
Hey. Yeah, this isn't a union meeting, all right? I know it's mainly union people here, but this isn't a union meeting. So let them answer. Show a little respect. There's other ways of dealing with this.
So manning is an issue that we work with your local officials with on a regular basis. It's discussed probably in almost every meeting that we have. And it's something we'll continue to look at. But the effort is never to put you in a situation that is unsafe. It's to make the waterfront as safe as it can be. Some of the positions you would ask if the value is there for that position to be retained. And if it's not, are you putting another person on the waterfront, on the string piece, in jeopardy who doesn't need to be there? And that's some of the factors we look at when the decisions are made.
So working two bays at the same time.
Okay, we're not going to go back.
Is okay with you?
Okay, I'm going to cut it off there because it's not for a back and forth discussion. You asked a question, he made a response, and there's a lot of other... I have a bunch of cards here that need to have questions answered on. So thank you for your question, but I want to keep this thing moving along. Next question is to any panelist, but I'm going to start with John Ficker. That is, why was the forecasting of 2004 so wrong or so unexpected? And I think any of us here in Southern California are pretty familiar with the idea that the forecasts are more often wrong than right. So from the perspective of the retail side, why were the forecasts so wrong?
Well, I don't think anyone expected the economy to turn as sharply up in 2004 as it did. There were projections of growth in 2004 in the low single digits, and we saw growth substantially beyond that. In addition to that, I think we had some other factors, as have been mentioned here, with lack of human resource and human capital, both on the waterfront, on the highways, and on the rail systems that impacted that. So I think the forecasting people don't want to bet their future completely on saying we're going to be up here. They'll try to take a moderate approach to that. I think there's more realism this year into this forecasting. But frankly, I don't know if any of you have a better crystal ball than I have, but I have a hard time figuring out what tomorrow's going to bring, let alone what December 25th is going to bring.
Do you have any sense, or does NITLE give any sense of what are they forecasting for this year?
We're forecasting a modest growth this year. We're probably several low percentage points above what we were in 2004, but several factors worldwide could impact that. We're now facing fuel at over $50 a barrel and talk of 80. Any of those economic factors could impact the primary engine of this movement of commerce, and that's you, the consumer. And if you, the consumer, are not out purchasing products because you're spending your resources in other areas, then that's going to take down the amount of commerce that's going to move, pure and simple. The economic balance is very tenuous, and dealing with that balance is going to be the challenge for both government and private sector.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else want to come in on that? Nobody brave enough. Okay. I'll take a question on my right-hand side. Again, your name, affiliation, and then a question for the panelists.
My name is Deborah Klein. I am a Local 13 member. And my question is going to be directed to Mr. Tidell and Mr. Harold. My question is, we have certain ports where within hours of the truckers delivering the trucks, it's on the ship. Now, if we can do that, because you forecast what's going to go where, and you have you already have the itinerary of what is on the ship and how it's going to come off the ship, How come, and you're talking about the fact that the cargo is sitting on the port for 7 days, et cetera. Why is it that you can't set up the system so that within, I understood what our ILW president said about how you have to deal with the chemical equations, whether it's poisonous gases, things like that, hazardous. But my question basically is this. If you can put the cargo on the ship within hours, why is it not being able to get off the port within 2 or 3 days? I know that you're trying to answer this, but to me, if you can put it on the ship in 2 or 3 hours, it should be able to leave the port in 2 or 3 days. You should have the truckers and everything. And I'm sorry, so this is also directed to the Truck Association person. You should have the truckers there and available for that.
Okay, good question.
I can take first crack at that. Actually, with the trucking companies go pick up freight when we're told to by the people that we work for. So if it's sitting there for long periods of time on the dock and not leaving the terminal, that's because we're not being directed to pick it up by the people that pay us. When we go to pick the freight up, we would love to be able to get in and out of the terminal in a reasonable amount of time as well to get the freight off the docks. But right now, we're getting 3, 4, 5 hour turn times in and out of the ports, and that decreases our productivity and ability to get the freight off the terminal as well.
Okay. I'm going to actually, Tom first.
Yeah. One of the things that I've seen over the years is that the cargo has to be entered and cleared and has to be available for the line to release it to the truck. And again, as Stacy said, you know, there is a percentage of cargo that the line is responsible to move on a door-to-door basis or a store-door basis. But there's also a lot of cargo that is responsible for the ultimate consignee to move. And sometimes, you know, we're calling them saying, you know, we've got the cargo here. And trust me, we're not in the business to collect demurrage. We're in the business to move the freight, get the empties back to the terminal, get them back on the ship, back to the Far East for loading again.
Okay, Dave, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I think the critical question here is if a trucker's making 1.4 moves a shift, it's just not acceptable. You know, rather than focusing on real large questions, if we focus on moving, you know, allowing a trucker to make 4 moves a shift, we begin to start maybe from that frog in the well where you're only looking at a part of it, and then we look at what it takes really to move the cargo off the dock. I've looked at the question of, you know, the terminal operations for years, and I've been to Europe and I've been to other places, and I've seen staging areas where truckers don't have to come inside the terminals, where the cargo's there for them. They can hook up and take off, and they can make those 4 moves a shift. You know, I mean, there's a series of things. They keep talking about this pier pass 24/7. You know, so a trucker can come in on the night side and move that cargo out. But then why should a trucker come in on the night side when he doesn't give time and a third or time and a half? He's got to stay up all night. You know, why should he have to do that? To me, the key to moving cargo this year and next year is a truck driver has become third worldized. He's not the lowest person on the waterfront. That's the guy on the ship who's a sailor who's making $300 a month. But they're pretty close to that. And I think until we solve that problem, we're not going to create the velocity that we need to create the capacity we're talking about on the dock. And I just think this is something the industry as a whole has to focus on, and it's not about longshoremen. It's about dealing with the trucker problem.
Dave, while I have you on that topic, I have a card here. And the question is, does the ILWU support Pier Pass?
Yeah, you know, we support it with the caveat that you can't dump everything on the trucking companies and the truck drivers, that the provisions have to be made so that they can make a decent living. And, you know, the idea of opening the gates 24/7, we totally are in support of. Is our workforce available and ready? Well, this week.
Okay, with that rousing applause, let me go and ask Stacy a question. Are there enough trucks available to support Pier Pass?
You know, that really remains to be seen. Our position on Pier Pass, we're still kind of neutral. We haven't really been engaged in the whole process of formulating Pure Pass. So we're learning about it along with everyone else and trying to see exactly how it's going to affect our drivers and our trucking companies. And so while we're ready and willing to move in and move off peak hours, I think that Dave made one of the points for me before I even got a chance to about are we going to have drivers that are going to be willing to work off hours for rates that are not necessarily going to be coming down more from the people that pay us? Are they going to be willing to leave daytime moves and go work at night and leave their families and change their lifestyle and do it for the same amount of pay? And we're already hearing some of our members telling us that they're going to be charged back by their shippers for the daytime container fee if they move a container during the day and they need to move it at night and just hang on to it and keep it until the next day and deliver it then, or they'll be charged back. So there's all kinds of issues that we have yet to see how they're going to affect the trucking side.
Okay. Thank you, Stacy. Okay, I'm going to take a question now on my left-hand side.
Okay, Socorro Fimbres, Local 13, Executive Board Member. This is basically around money from the companies. Instead of taxing the public, can we make the shippers or retailers pay their share for the infrastructure, rails, roads, because they're the ones profiting from all of this stuff, and all we're doing is making a living.
Okay, thank you. So the basic question is, can we put a fee on containers coming into the country to have them pay for the infrastructure? Anybody brave enough to take that? Is there a congressman in the House?
I'll take that one.
Okay.
Anybody? Nobody else wants to answer, but look, the question of how we fund the infrastructure, and I compare it to this, when we became an industrial nation, you got Chicago, you got Detroit, you got LA, and all the people started moving into those cities. It took 15 years for the infrastructure to catch up with the economy. And that's what we're faced with. We're faced with this massive import coming in from Asia, and the infrastructure has not caught up with the world productivity and where it's distributed and so forth. And this is what we're faced with. So it's not just going to be one element that has to deal with this. This infrastructure on the West Coast has to catch up with the new global economy. And that's what we're faced with. So you can't just point the finger at one sector. Again, I raise the issue that if we don't work together as a transportation system, from production to distribution and everybody involved in the middle, and putting that kind of pressure on our congressmen, our senators, our state legislators, our local political officials, our port authorities, then we're not going to get this job done. We keep pointing the finger, we're not going to get this job done. Everybody's got to step up to the plate, including the union, if we're going to get this done. But if this infrastructure is not dealt with, all of you sitting out there that got this good job right now, 5 or 10 years from now, might not have the job we have today. So it's not just a question of contract. It's a question of political policy and how we shape that political policy in America around the transportation industry. And we need to do that collectively.
Thank you very much, Dave. Doug, and then John.
I couldn't agree with David more. I think one of the things that really strikes me is I spent a lot of time in Asia. I lived there. I travel there a lot dealing with my customers. Every one of the countries that exports to us has a national policy on trade and transportation. And I think Dick mentioned it recently in a speech, and I think it's to his credit that he did, is the U.S. really doesn't have a policy on national infrastructure to support trade and transport. We all talk about getting together. We all have good intentions. There's a lot of things that need to be done. We don't really have the framework to engage in constructive dialogue. We're starting to see some of that evolve at the California state level, and I certainly compliment the state legislature and some of the things that they're doing. But we need a national transportation policy relating to trade, and to me, that's terribly missing right now.
John, chime in.
Thank you. Doug, I couldn't agree with you more. In several speeches I've given recently around the country, it's been my absolute focus to try to tell folks that what we need in this country is a national freight transportation policy. And let me tell you folks, you have that responsibility, not the people in this panel, because the legislators will listen to you as constituents and as individuals to be the voice of freight. Most transportation activity in our Congress in the United States and in the state capitals around this country are focused on personal mobility, the pothole on 5th Street, not the movement of commerce and the movement of freight. And as you all know better than I, freight is the circulatory system of our economy. And we know what happens when you plug up an artery. We have to be the voice of freight to the elected officials of this country to say the movement of commerce is good for the economy, it keeps the economy going, it keeps you in jobs, and it keeps me in a job as well. So you have to be the voice of the freight transportation industry.
I have such a temptation to stop right now because I just got the shippers, the marine terminals and the union all to agree on the same topic. So I want to call it a night right now, but I won't. I think a question on my right, please.
Hello, my name's J.D. Connick and I live here in Long Beach. This is fascinating to see this. It seems like everybody is coming together on this congestion problem. We have ships sitting offshore, just sitting there. It's costing how much is it? $50,000 to $100,000 a day to sit there. We sit in our trucks waiting, breathing pollution fumes. Everybody's sitting in traffic behind trucks, wondering why we're on a 65-mile-an-hour freeway going 15 or 0 miles an hour. And we all have to come in here and see that this is everybody's problem. It's not these people at the front desk. We have to see that it costs we're $15 billion behind in infrastructure just to fix what we have, it sounded to me like.
Okay.
And
I hate to hurry you up, but
I've got one more thing.
And then I need to get a question.
Okay, and we have to know what it's costing us for us to move and get this thing done. Last week at the town hall meeting, they came up with a figure. It's $28.5 billion a year that Southern Californians pay in medical bills alone for pollution-related illnesses. Now that means the dock workers. Just a second.
I'm going to cut you off because we did a whole event on environment last year. This is about congestion and goods movement.
I have a solution though.
If you I need a question to the panelists, or you're done.
I have a question.
I know. Hey, next year you can be a panelist. All right. Now you got to ask a question.
Well, what I'd like to know is how we're going to come up with the money if we're this far behind. That's $28.5 billion a year for the past 10 years or whatever, and no end in sight. So what I would like to know is how we are going to fund this with impasses, with no taxes in California going on.
Okay. Anybody care to, how are we going to fund this infrastructure? Dave, you're always the bravest.
Sure. I think Doug raised the issue, and so did John. The realities are we have no national policy. We have no policy to coordinate transportation, particularly in the new global economy. Where does policy come from? It comes from the people. It comes from the needs of the people. As the needs of the people begin to express themselves, so do politicians. And what we need to do, from my point of view, there was a forum up in Tacoma put on by one of our leaders, Willie Adams, and his slogan was a call to conscience. And I think this industry needs a call to conscience that the American people can relate to. We got to move out of the isolation. We have to develop in the industry, and we have to fight for a quality of life in America that's a middle-class standard of living. That we've got to fight to improve the environment. That we've got to fight for productivity and the creation of more jobs. And we've got to sell that to America. That's what we're about. When we start selling that to America, then the American people will funnel the money into the transportation system because they'll see that relationship. We don't do that. We don't come together. We can't keep talking about a national policy. The national policy has to start here on the West Coast in this port. That's where the national policy has to start, right here, and we're capable of doing it.
I'm going to ask, that's too tempting. I'm going to ask a follow-on question. Who is going to be the one that brings everybody together? Because right now, anybody who observes what goes on in the industry sees everybody operating in separate silos. Who is going to be the one that convenes people to come together? Is it going to be the ports? Is it going to be the steamship lines? Is it going to be the union? Who is going to be the organism? What is going to be the organism that pulls that conversation together? Don't all speak at once.
I will attempt that. It's got to be a collaborative effort for everybody that's involved in the transportation supply chain. We do, and we had this conversation internally in our company, we do a very poor job of advertising and promoting our industry from the labor point of view, from the terminal's point of view, from the carrier's point of view, from the trucker's point of view. Again, I'll go back to the Midwest. People don't realize what happens in our industry. They not only understand and see the negative feedback when they see, pictures of ships stacked up, or when there's a work stoppage, or there's something going on out in the West Coast, or the East Coast, or the Gulf. So again, we're our own worst enemies, and we all have to step up to the plate as an organization, as an industry, and take it forward.
Dave?
I just believe, longshoremen on the West Coast are a horse you want to ride, okay? We're fast, we're strong, we're efficient, we're united up and down the West Coast, we're a strong political force. We're willing to add that. We're willing to add that. We're tired of getting beat up and blamed for things. We're tired of that. And we don't want to have to fight the PMA. We don't want to have to fight the Trucking Association. We don't want to have to fight the carriers. We want to be in a cooperative effort. But there's got to be some middle ground that's reached that lays the foundation for this. There's got to be some organizational forum that allows us to come together to speak with one voice. And the starting point is not to be beating each other up, as we have been in the past years. And that's where we need to go. But there's a horse to ride here on the West Coast, and it's called the ILWU, and we're ready to run.
I still haven't heard the name of an organization or somebody who was going to say, okay, we're all going to get together and actually sit down and start to make some plans to do something.
Well, there was.
Waiting for Doug to do that.
Okay, Doug?
Back in when Rodney Slater was Secretary of Transportation, everything we're talking about today was well defined in a national white paper dealing with infrastructure to support the maritime transportation industry. And the transition, Secretary Mineta picked up that initiative. The National Advisory Council was set up, and it got completely derailed with 9/11. In terms of developing a national forum for bringing people together to develop consensus, to look at the issues we've all talked about, where's the money going to come from? It's not going to come from public sector money. It's going to need to be public-private partnerships. I think that effort needs to be re-energized. I've been really pleased that the MARAD has opened a Long Beach office. I think that's a positive step, but I think it's a small step on a long road that on a national level we need to pursue.
Doug, I want to just echo one comment that you made that I think is absolutely critical, and having been in Washington. The events of 9/11 did distract our government, and rightfully so, from being as concerned about this as they were about protecting you and I in this country we call America. So there is now some energy building, some impetus moving in Washington to recognize these problems. But let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the bad guys are still out there, and they still want to do us harm. And security is the other major linchpin that we all better be prepared for, because if any event of any consequence happens in the world of ports and seaports, these issues of congestion that we're talking about are going to be just nothing compared to the problems we could face. And we all know that. We all sit back and heard it. And we need to realize that security and capacity are the two major issues that are facing the movement of commerce in this country.
Thank you, John. Okay, on my left.
Take a swipe at
Okay,
it, because I think,
real fast.
I think this question or the statement was that safety isn't being talked about. And, you know, we had a tragedy on the waterfront about a month ago, and we got to make sure that we're working together that we never see a tragedy like that again. We've been talking about safety with Dave and other union officials since I came here in June of 2004. We're meeting right now on a bi-weekly basis with your union officials to talk specifically about safety issues and safety issues that your officials are bringing to us that they've seen on the terminals. We've been told that the industry hasn't reacted in the past, so we put together a mechanism where those issues that you bring to us will go to the JAPC. If they're not resolved in a timely manner to the satisfaction of the parties, they'll come back to the other body and we'll bring it to resolution. So I want to make sure that we have a clear understanding that safety is being discussed, and not just discussed, but acted upon on a regular basis between your officials and the PMA and the member companies.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah, if I could just quickly comment on that. The PMA and the union are working actively together on the question of safety on the waterfront, and the PMA has been totally cooperative in this arena. In other areas we may be fighting, but in this arena, the PMA has stepped up, and we are working with each and every terminal and with the PMA in general. We're setting up a new framework for safety, so that shouldn't be an issue here.
Thank you, Dave.
Can I still continue? My question is, we still have old equipment, you know, UTRs breaking down all the time. We got a new set of cranes that are also cracked. I mean, that you know reduces productivity, you know, and a lot of the people here are going to do 20 years, 30 years on here, and when we have UTRs that are 10 years old, 15 years old, you know, you can only go.
Doug, since you're our terminal operator, how do you want to address that issue of old equipment or replacement of equipment, or is that PMA or is it marine terminal operators?
Well, you know, with the expansion of cargo volume, the average age actually of all of at least the fleets we operate are coming down relatively dramatically. And as you all know, we opened many of you know we opened a new facility this year, the China shipping facility, with all environmentally friendly equipment and all brand new equipment. So I'm sure some terminals have spot problems, but I don't think that's across the board.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn to my right here.
Grant Carner, member of good standing, Local 13. A lot of talk about labor shortage and a lot of other contract issues, it seems like, and I feel kind of shorted. It seems we also should have had somebody here on the panel that was to represent the retail chains.
Well, we do. That's Mr. Ficker here.
Oh, good. So how then are the so how are the retail chains stepping up to the plate? And are they going to be accepting cargo on a regular basis and not these set times? We, as the local people that run the waterfront, labor-wise, are working 24 hours nonstop each day. During a labor shortage, there was machines that were broke down. There was more men than there were machines. And all the whole time, the retail stores were still not opening their doors until 6 and 7 o'clock in the morning, which was creating a huge, huge, huge problem. And today I worked a shift, we were doing a can a minute. Nobody can keep up with that. And I just kind of like to know what the retail stores are doing to step up and help out.
Okay. I don't have a great answer for you, and I wish I did. I represent 600 companies that move freight and cargo around the United States and around the world. I know that they're concerned about the timely movement of their freight and their cargo. I believe that the incentives that are being put in place, whether it be a disincentive with demurrage or an incentive to not pay a pier pass fee, I think you'll see a change in the behavior of most or many of the operations in the future. But I can't speak to specifics. I'm sorry.
I have one more question on the card here, and that's for George Fetty. What do you know of the rail company's plans to haul Pacific Rim trade out of the West Coast ports, and is this a long-term solution?
The railroads have pretty balanced flows now. Unfortunately for us, a lot of the traffic from here did go up to the Pacific Northwest, but the flow of traffic in the Pacific Northwest ports was there was less eastbound traffic than westbound. So there was an aggregating of westbound intermodal equipment into the Pacific Northwest. By sending more ships up there, this balance of cargo back and forth, east and west, is pretty well evened out. On the other hand, in Southern California, the preponderant flow is eastbound with a lesser westbound flow. So between these two dichotomies, the railroads were in the position of having to deadhead surplus equipment that aggregated in the Pacific Northwest to Southern California. That amounted to, in the case of Burlington Northern Santa Fe, as many as 5 trains a day. There were nothing but empty equipment coming down here. Today, they may send 1 or 2 trains a week down here. So the back and forth flow of rail equipment is evened out. The velocity is coming up. The dwell time of empty equipment is less. And this is a process change that they didn't change, but our congestion here caused this happening where we lost cargo here to the Pacific Northwest, and that actually helped the railroad operating environment. The railroads were definitely behind the curve in terms of hiring people. Here a few years ago, I had a high-ranking official of one of the Western railroads tell me, and another thing, George, we don't believe your numbers. He was talking about port growth, and I said, I don't blame you. We've always underestimated them by 50%. And this was the guy who was doing the planning for what the railroad needed. So you see, they were really behind the understanding of what was happening in the San Pedro Bay ports. They don't have a misunderstanding anymore. They know what's happening here, and they're reacting quickly to it.
Thank you, George. And I'm going to, let's see, you ready for a question? I'll take 2 last questions from the floor. This gentleman here on my left first.
This question is directed to John Ficker. My name is Dave Lopez. I'm a member of ILW Local 13. Approximately 60 years ago, the country of Nicaragua was approached with building a canal similar to the Panama Canal. And I don't believe this legislation has ever been turned over, but would your companies be considered, would they consider using their influence through the United States Congress, and you asked a question, whose job is it to bring everyone in this industry together? Okay, we have a Secretary of Commerce, and it's part of our government that exists already. So would your companies be interested or in using their influence to have another canal built in the country of Nicaragua to accommodate, I'm not finished, to accommodate the post-Panamax ships? Now, if you did this, you would have a new canal that would accommodate the ships, the post-Panamax ships, and in the meantime, when that canal was actually in operation, the Panama Canal could be shut down and reworked to accommodate post-Panamax ships.
Okay, we'll just let him ask the question. I think it'll be a brief answer.
I'll be as brief as I can. First of all, you're dealing with other countries anymore. When we built the Panama Canal at the turn of the last century, we went down there, took over the land as the United States, and did that. We have given the canal back to the Panamanians, and they now have total control of that, so it would be their countries or the country of Nicaragua that would be responsible to build that. I will say one other thing about the canal. There is a plan that I have heard of, I have not seen it, that indicates that the Panama Canal wants to expand itself, and it's to the tune of some, I don't know what the numbers are, it's in the billions and billions of dollars to expand it. But where is that money going to come from? The United States is not going to fund that. I can guarantee you that.
The world benefits by the Panama
we can't get
Canal.
into we're almost at, we're pretty much out of time. We can't get into a discussion on it. I have one more gentleman waiting for a question over here.
My name is Salvador Robledo, Local 13. My question is to Dave and the PMA representative there. If, my understanding, what I heard today, we have 7,000 members and over 7,000 casual members, then why don't we have, or why can't we reinstitute the 3 o'clock shift? And why are there only a certain or a few terminals that work a 3 o'clock shift?
Okay,
so yeah, the PMA will have to answer that one.
I think that's the most imperative question of tonight.
We actually have reinstituted the 0300 hoot shift, and we did it, I think, in January. So any member company that wants to work a hoot shift has the ability to do it. And matter of fact, we're not reducing anybody's availability of labor. Any order that's placed will be filled for whatever shift it's asked for. It really comes down to vessel schedule and do you need to work the hoot or not, because the hoot's not the most efficient shift when you're working five hours versus 8. If there's volume and a need to keep ships on schedule, I'm sure more companies will, but there's nothing to prevent somebody from ordering a hoot shift today.
If you're talking about a congestion problem, I think that's one of the main answers there.
Well, it may in fact be an answer. We're not facing congestion right now to the level we saw last year, but when there is congestion and there is labor availability and there is an infrastructure that will support it, I'm sure you'll see a lot of hoot shifts worked.
Okay, thank you. I would like to thank the panelists.
Hold on. I got one more suggestion.
No, we are literally out of time.
It's a question. You asked if we could have an organization to get involved to help.
Okay.
I'm Scott Stewart, Local 13. An organization to get involved with this whole transportation. Wouldn't the Cancer Association be involved?
The what?
The Cancer
Association? Because the air quality control and would help with the actual thing of transportation.
It's a thought. Okay, thank you. Okay, once again, I want to thank the panelists. I would ask them to keep their seats while we wrap up. I'm going to call Jen Giuliano to come up to make some closing remarks. And please, a round of applause for the panelists and the questioners.
Hi, everybody. I have the pleasure of, in 5 minutes, making sense of what happened over an hour and a half. And that's what I'm going to do very quickly. I want to try to just sum up what I've heard, and I wanted to make just a few observations. What I heard was a whole lot about capacity problems and the resulting congestion. And I heard they were on dockside, I heard they were on the highways, I heard they were on the rails, and I heard they were on the distribution centers. I heard basically 2 responses. One was all about faster turnaround time. I heard about shortening berth dwell time for ships. I heard about getting the cargo off the docks quicker. I heard about getting intermodal cargo onto rails quicker. And in fact, we all know that nobody wants anything in a warehouse. So the whole story here is that everybody wants it out of the way as quickly as possible. If you think about that, it requires unbelievable coordination, sort of this massive choreography across an enormous and complicated supply chain. That takes incredible cooperation and coordination. And of course, we heard a lot tonight about where was that coordination going to come from. Also, if we want to do something like become that efficient, any bottleneck anywhere in the system will cause that not to happen. So any one weak link is going to stop that effort to become faster and better. The second response I heard was we need more infrastructure. We need more highways, we need more rail, We need more intermodal facilities and so on. However, that is not a short-term answer. That's only a long-term answer. It will take a good 10 years to see any sort of massive, significant increase in capacity here in Southern California, just because of the environmental process, even if we had the billions of dollars to do it. We don't have those billions of dollars. And again, you heard today a whole lot about the amount of coordination, cooperation, and leadership that it will take if those dollars are ever going to get to Southern California. What I also heard tonight was, from Mr. Ficker actually, the incredible flexibility of the system. Somehow we have survived with no basic increases in capacity on the passenger side, and huge increases in population and travel. And how did we do that? Well, people and everybody, people have been flexible. We're kind of out of that kind of flexibility at this point, and that leads me to time and space. The only things that we can try to adjust are the way we use the time that we have and the way we use the space that we have. In time, it sounds to me like 24/7 is inevitable. Sooner or later, the gate hours are going to be extended. Sooner or later, retailers are going to accept goods off hours and so on, because that's the only way the system will keep operating. Secondly, the only way we can make space more productive is technology. So another piece of the short-term future is the implementation of technology far beyond what we've done today. I want to leave you with one thought, and that is that we're all going to pay no matter what happens. There is no free lunch. So if the cooperation and the coordination that people have talked about tonight doesn't happen, we're all going to be paying in one way or another. We're going to be paying by higher prices, we're going to be paying by more congestion, and ultimately by the quality of life in Southern California. So I'm going to end by challenging everybody that's been here today on the panel and in the audience to think about where the leadership is going to come from and to make some nominations about how to start this cooperative process. Thank you.
Looking back, it was a sight to see, either firsthand or as portrayed in this evening's videotape. Ships silhouetted across the horizon, workers scrambling to meet labor demands, not enough trucks and trains to move goods, ships constantly off schedule, retailers and customers anxiously waiting for their goods, either holed up in vessels or sitting on the dock. Everyone was asking the question, what happened to just-in-time arrival? Some have likened this phenomena to a perfect transportation storm or a tsunami of containers flooding our shores. In either case, conditions well in the making and acting in concert created much frustration and chaos. Should we be surprised this happened? Not really. There's ample evidence that highlights the problem. China, a manufacturing giant along with other Asian nations, supplies us with the goods we no longer make in this country. They send us Lotus containers, we ship back the empties. Aggravating the problem is the American appetite for readily available and bargain price consumer goods. This demand is fueled in large part by Southern California's surge in population. Presently, there are approximately 20 million people living in our 5-county region, and we expect another 6 million within the next decade. Mix a surge in Asian manufacturing with an explosive consumer demand, sprinkle with an old and antiquated port-related infrastructure, fold in a myriad of addressed but unresolved goods movement issues, and simmer over environmental concerns. The result? A recipe for goods movement chaos. Coping with these conditions was not easy. A more difficult task is to develop plans and procedures that will prevent future cargo gridlock. Hopefully this evening's town hall meeting will guide us in that direction. Panelists and town hall participants gave excellent suggestions as how to avert such a future crisis. It's important to remember that individual work and business strategies cannot be developed in a vacuum. Organizations attempting to deal with these issues independently will be unable to mesh with the broader scheme of moving goods and will do little to solve the problem of handling increased cargo flows. Cooperation is the key to solving these problems. In line with this thinking, there are a number of critical issues that require combining the efforts of industry stakeholders. The first is trucking. How do we as an industry ensure enough trucks will be available to move increasing volumes of cargo, along with a pool of willing and able drivers, earning a living wage and operating the safest, most fuel-efficient, and non-polluting trucks? It goes without saying that creating and maintaining a clean environment will require a total commitment by all stakeholders. Industry-wide environmental goals and standards must be established and met. It would be unwise to idle down the port's economic engines. Instead, our ports must be operated smarter and cleaner. Working our terminals more efficiently, extending their boundaries over improved infrastructure, while keeping them free of terrorist attack is an industry-wide challenge. Much has already been done, but we are still far from hitting the mark. Our industry should seriously explore and implement the idea of developing inland ports and near-dock container transfer facilities. Pushing our ports inland would reduce on-dock container dwell time and free up space at marine terminals. Industry must also marshal forces to request federal and state funding to improve and expand port-related infrastructure and to keep our harbors free from terrorist attack. Labor's ability to move goods efficiently and help avert a future cargo crisis is a combined labor management responsibility. It is amazing how quickly thousands of new longshore workers were processed, trained, and put to work. Training for longshore casuals is minimal at best. To work safer and be more productive, they need additional on-the-job training, sponsored jointly by the union and the employer. Over the years, our ports and community groups have joined forces to address problems concerning port cargo gridlock, infrastructure improvements, homeland security, and a variety of environment issues and concerns. How successful have they been in this endeavor? If we gauge their success by currently pending legislation that addresses the aforementioned issues, then they fall short of accomplishing set goals. Many have complained that both industry and community groups have approached pending issues from an individual or short-sighted approach, rather than taking a broader collective tact, leaving many problems unresolved and initiating spirited legislative activity. The decisions we make as an industry affect hundreds of thousands of people across the globe. As such, we do not have the luxury, or quite frankly, the right to make decisions based solely on individuals' wants, needs, and desires. Ours is a collective responsibility. Industry and community groups will be most successful and serve their constituents best when they engage in cooperation, coordination, and consensus, and embrace the idea of doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people. You've been a gracious audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic, very much for those kind words. And also, thank you very much, Professor Giuliano, for the summary of the panel discussion. Before we adjourn, ladies and gentlemen, I would like you to remind you one more time to please fill out the evaluation form. Remember, no form, no dirtbag tickets. So please do that. And while you fill out those forms, I have to give credit to those people who put this event together. It takes a lot of organizational skills and it takes attention for detail. And I would like to recognize Alex Traver, who took on the role as the event coordinator. She, together with Carrie Phipps and Barbara Faring and all the volunteers, need a round of applause. Thank you. I also want to take this opportunity to mention one more time that this event was funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation and by Caltrans through the Metrans Transportation Center. I also need to recognize our sponsors. We had 5 key sponsors tonight, and those were the Port of Long Beach, the Port of Los Angeles, the ILWU, Local 13, 6494, who also sponsored the reception. Thank you again. The Pacific Maritime Association, the City College of Long Beach, the Office of Economic and Research Development, and the Alameda Corridor Transportation Authority. A big thanks to all. And also the trade association that endorsed this event. It's listed here on the back of your program. So let me conclude then with saying one more time thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our moderator, to our speakers, Dr. Husing. It has been a wonderful event, and thank you for the audience for joining us again. See you at the 8th annual town hall meeting. Good night.